So good morning, good evening, everyone. Last time I have been beginning to speak about the Iddhipada, the 4 bases of power, which is one of the classic lists in the Pali canon, in the early canon. And this is a list of 4 qualities of expression of energy, which each of us have at least in seed form, and that can be developed and strengthened through practice. And this for Iddhipada is a way, of how we can look at our practice and see developments and unfoldings. And that can be very encouraging. And often we can only see it in hindsight. And these 4 qualities are, just go over them one more time shortly. Chanda, wholesome desire or vision, what the heart yearns for. And then the second one is virya, effort or courage, the decision to go for it, for what the heart yearns for. And then the next one is chitta, which is integration and big picture thinking, and that's more like the marathon, of putting our vision into action. And then the 4th and last one is vimamsa, or investigation, problem solving, the question, does it work? And I put the handout again into the chat for those who haven't been here last time, in case you wish to download it. It can be really helpful as a template. And today I want to go a little bit deeper into the first quality, which is vision. And that's a vision not to fix or save anything, but rather to open and sense into our situation as fully as we can, with our whole being. And particularly at that time now, as we are again at a threshold in regards to humanity's place in the vast scheme of things, our place in the cosmos. There's so much kind of complexity and technology and not enough ethics, and it has become a real huge mess. And if we look back, through humanity's history on this planet, we can recognize that there have already been 2 great phase transitions so far, and we are just now in the 3rd one that has begun, we can say. So, after living in small hunter-gatherer bands for over 2 million years, which is an incredibly long time span, 2 million years, where not much has changed in terms of the living arrangements. And then, at that time, proto-humans and later humans have related to the planet as a giving parent. And then about just 10,000 years ago, it came to the first transition. And these were the beginnings of agriculture, and with that, the beginnings of trying to pacify and control nature. Because there were these fears, which were coming up, which were new fears, worrying about if there will be enough rain or not too much rain, if there be enough sun or too much sun. All of those worries, they started to become more prominent because there was not so much moving about happening anymore for those societies. They were basically in one place because they had been making fields and they had been accumulating possessions, and there were houses and so on and so forth. And then with that, a lot of worry came. Worry about the future. And then, religious practices were kicking in around appeasing deities and ancestors in order to achieve harmony with the whole. And deities and ancestors were approached as intercessors between, the farmers and the whole. And then just a few centuries ago, with the rise of the scientific age, another transition started to come about. And that was a transition towards a more direct attempt to control, manipulate, and extract nature. And that, that shift was heavily supported by Christianity, which has, officially was giving God's permission with the papal bulls to raid foreign continents on an extremely vast scale. And the greatest genocide that ever happened, on this planet was on Turtle Island, where many of us are. Not all of us, some are in Europe. And the people came from Europe here. And it came to the killing, of about 100 million people and 60 million bison, which is like unimaginable. Imagining a heap of these dead bodies, how huge that would be. This is what has happened. And it's now, starting to emerge into the public sphere, which is, incredibly important and incredibly challenging. So, as we are looking at the past, we can see how the values of a so-called civilization, so-called, underlined, are themselves the result of historical constructions. So what was once okay a few hundred years ago, with the Pope saying, you just go out and kill everybody who is not Christian, because that is okay with God, to a time now when all of those things are coming into the public discourse and are metabolized slowly, and where we have to find again, our place in the cosmos anew, within the biophysical constraints of the planet, because those biophysical constraints of the planet weren't apparent at that time, really, yet. People weren't capable of conceiving of that. And they were thinking, the planet is limitless and has no needs, like a baby, thinking about their parent. So, need to find again our place. And the good news is, in all of this, that imagination loves limits. Limits activate creativity to bring forth, new solutions. And artists are often the first ones to express this longing on scale, through music and sculpture and all of the many ways, art can show up in the world. And certain imaginative practices can be a bridge for our nervous systems to renew themselves and thereby update our capacity for what's called cultural imagination, because that's what's missing at this point, the cultural imagination to imagine different worlds we can live in. And and imagination is a skillful means for that. And the Vajrayana in particular has always used, visualization in imagination as an important ingredient for practice, where they were, where people are instructed to imagine whole celestial realms and mandalas where the Buddha resides in and things like that. That was a way, of imagining different ways of being alive, and through that update the nervous system that this is truly possible, and refine the capacity, to stay focused on that. And we know from modern medicine, that stress, the cortisol, reduces the size of the hippocampus of the human brain, and this is where memory and imagination reside. They're residing in the hippocampus. And therefore we need to intentionally work to bring back online these capacities through training. So if the hippocampus is shrunk, it can shrink for 20% or so. So it can considerably shrink if a person is under constant stress. And then there is very little capacity for memory or imagination, because all of the energy goes into just surviving. And then it's just a broken record, basically, with very little depth. Because it's all about just getting to the next day. And I've often shared the quote by James Hillman, who was actually an American Jungian psychologist, who said, to sense deeply we must imagine, and to imagine accurately we must sense. So imagining and sensing are the practices, which can help us to develop our dormant capacity for participating in the unfolding of this planet. And in these practices, of course, they don't solve all problems, but they are a foundation from which there can be an unfolding of an open-hearted and open-minded participation in the human experience at this time in history on the planet, as we are needing to find our place in the vast scheme of things again. Because the old ways, they are no longer up to the job. And this is a normal occurrence, that from time to time there needs to be a transition. And with that comes like a maturing of our recognition that we are part of a living intelligent earth, not just like babies, to be taken care of by the Great Mother, but participants who have a duty, who have agency. And the practices, here on Wednesdays are about trying to hone that agency so that we all might, become more confident in participating in the unfolding. Because there will not be a single big man, who is going to save us. Because those times are over, really. We have to all work together on this. So let's now, shift to the meditation again, guided meditation. And just trying to, drop into the body. By allowing the mind to rest on the body, just as the body rests on the cushion on the chair. With the clear knowing, that we have all what it takes to participate in this. We just need to let go of certain constraints, in regards to the cultural imagination. And just, it's not a small thing to do, of course, but it's all in the It's all in the thinking, and of course also in the physiology, the neural pathways. They are also impacted by the conditioning, of course. So it's not like an easy thing to just snap out of it. It needs to be built through repetition, because new neural pathways need to come online, which haven't been used, maybe for a few centuries. So it's uncomfortable, but it's doable, because it's all, the capacities are there, even if they are dormant. And first, we need to have a language to name it. Because thinking, and language and culture is a very complex, intertwined process. Mutually conditioning. So now sensing the body on the cushion on the chair, and the dropping in with everything what's here. The pleasant and the unpleasant, that both are part of what needs to be known. It's not just about having a pleasant experience, and that's what a good meditation is, but a good meditation is being with what is. If there's resistance, that's known as well. Nothing left out. The whole experience. It's more or less, making ourselves available to what is. Not just to sections of that, but the whole. And turning our awareness to wherever, awareness is called to. In my case at the moment, it's my, more or less, the core of my torso. I've just been having my breakfast before. I can feel the digestion going on in there. And then I can feel the weight, pressing the bones, the sitting bones pressing on the mat where I sit. And just being here. And any stress, tension, tiredness, just letting it drop down. Down into the soil underneath where I'm sitting. And breathing up the stability, the vastness, the stillness of the planet, of which I'm a part. participant. And when the mind wanders off into thinking about something, whenever you're noticing it, that has happened, just gently bringing the mind back to this very simple experience of body sitting and breathing in and breathing out. Inside planet Earth, like an earthworm. The planet, going up many more miles. It's not ending at the ground, where we sit upon. But there's just different layers. The core is like hot liquid. And then there's different layers and layers and layers until above the clouds, sometime where, the atmosphere gives way into space. And that can be observed, if we climb a high mountain, the oxygen content gets less and less. But it's still the body of the earth. And we are inside of that body, like cells in a vast being. And cells in a vast being are not expected to control the being, but they are expected to participate and do their piece. That's all. And that's, we can compare that realization with the realization of a human being, which as a baby expects to be taken care of by the parents and then, becomes like a little tyrant for some time, a toddler, a teenager, completely obsessed with oneself. Because that's how it goes. And then if there's a healthy development, then at one point people mature into adults and become members, of their society, participating and pulling their weight in some way or another, according to what they can do. And that happens also on a scale of cultural paradigm, worldview. And for the Western worldview, we seem to be on that threshold of slowly, coming into young adulthood, hopefully, before it's too late. And learning from indigenous cultures who have preserved that. that cycle through ceremony, initiations, and other technologies, to support that cycle for the individuals and through that for the society. But the Western culture is all about extracting attention and shopping, and has run out of steam now, which is a blessing in disguise, really. So, and fully participating in that emergence is a service we can render. Because we already know how to practice awareness. And as soon as we realize, that this is a natural unfolding, which we can participate in, that's the opportunity for a vision to be born in the heart. To understand, how we can participate. By allowing that transition to inform us and then showing up accordingly. It might take time, to find the right means to express. But if there is the vision, there's a beginning for that. And enthusiasm and interest, a value, which is recognized, where the heart leaps up to that value and wants to live it, even it doesn't yet know how to. But without that vision, there's never any opening. And in terms, of the archetype, Jungian archetype, it would be the lover, really falling in love with a possibility. Kind of a passion which, sets free energy. It's an opening. And a sense of a pull, a yearning, a longing. But not, longing for wanting more, whatever, diamond rings or cars, but it's a longing for participating and benefiting oneself and all of life. And the humility, to listen. to how that could happen. And not just listening to what we want to hear, but to everything which comes through and which needs to be metabolized, like, these different patterns of oppression and harm, which have been part of the unfolding, of course. But the stress, which is created through those harms, is limiting our capacity to imagine. So it needs to be metabolized to a certain extent for that imagination and capacity to participate in something which hasn't been before. That also goes hand in hand. There needs to be a reckoning. Not in terms of, that we are bad and all of that, but in terms of interacting with the laws of nature in the way we can interact. It's a more surrender and acceptance and intelligent and animate intelligence, which knows where the bottleneck lies, it senses into that. And inviting whatever needs to be understood. And leaning onto the Buddha's instructions on how to do that, on how to work with the mind and the body and the heart, for that to really take place, that metabolization and opening. While at the same time, knowing that this teaching has also been transmitted inside of the paradigm and now needs to be turned towards the dying paradigm, the capacity to understand. So an animate intelligence, which is the natural extension, of the planet, which we eat, drink, and breathe all the time, We are made out of that materials. We are not separate. But our language and our culture doesn't yet express that enough. And this is the beginning of that. This is coming through now. And the climate collapse is the pressure cooker within which that realization will emerge into our consciousness. And if we want to have less stress, we need to cooperate with that emergence and make space by imagining and sensing. Lubricating, the channels for it to take up residence in us and through us. And supporting each other, in this island of coherence. But there's some kind of common understanding about this situation. So sensing the aliveness, vibrancy, vitality, the life force as it expresses in our bodies. And the animate intelligence of that life force, which cannot be related to through the intellect, but it can be related to our whole being, our body, our intuition, our own animate intelligence. which already knows, in this very non-conceptual way of knowing that something is happening. We are at a threshold. There's no going back. And sensing into that, the majesty of that moment, as that becomes more and more accepted and part of the cultural imagination of people. Because that's the only way how our species, can continue. And at the same time, make space for future generations to have a place. So that vision, that enthusiasm, interest, passion, chanda, a wholesome desire to participate. Rather than being rescued by somebody who thinks that they can do that. Which is a really outdated way of looking, called patriarchy. Attention, if deepened, gives rise to intention. Attention, if deepened, gives rise to intention. And intention, if deepened, gives rise to agency. So the staying with experience, allows us to go deeper and then become an agent of that what is understood. To, as Ajahn Sumedho said many times, to really stand under, to really go close, to have an intimate relationship with that experience and to fully participate. And then we will know what to do. In small and in big ways. And mostly it's small steps, many small steps. Slowly leading in the right direction. Accumulative. And I'm sure if you look back onto your life, you can see that. And then sometimes we change direction because we adjust. and as we are slowly coming to the end of the session today, calling to mind our ancestors who knew belonging to Earth in their bones, and calling to mind the future ones whose lives will be shaped by what we decide to do. And being part of that lineage of human life on this planet, and playing our little role as fully as we can. We don't need to save anyone, but we need to allow ourselves to be saved by paying attention.